Hello friends, welcome to Byju's. Today we'll discuss Sociology Mains Paper 1, 2018. First, we'll just look at the rough overview of the paper, broad overview, from which section, how many questions were there, what was the total weightage from which part, and then we will see each of these questions. We'll go for a detailed analysis of each and every question. So first thing, as you can see on the screen, I have this entire syllabus of paper 1 is mentioned on the left hand side, and again the remaining part, then what is the total number of questions from which portion and what is the total number of marks. See, one thing you might note that the total number of questions you see here is 28 and the total weightage is 400. Why? Because I have taken all the questions. I'm not considering the options that you are given. This basically gives us a rough overview, better overview of how things were asked this year. So in exam you have to answer somewhere around 5 questions out of 8, and you have to answer 18 subparts out of 28. But here it is total is 28, and the total mark accordingly is 400. Now as you can observe, the maximum weightage is from sociological thinkers, and then it was from stratification and mobility. Also, you can observe that all the sections were covered. Social change in modern society, the weightage was comparatively less. Apart from that, all sections, at least 2-3 questions we are expecting. And again, more or less 30-40 marks from each section. Now, if you go through the question, I felt that there were certain questions which were very, very specific. Okay? And then there were some questions which were general, but what was different was some very specific questions. Again, you need to have studied all those details, then only you would have been able to answer that. So, to some extent, I felt the question was a little difficult than previous years. Now, what we'll do is we will go through each and every question one by one. So, the first question that we had, part A, the compulsory questions. So, it says the focal point of sociology rests on interaction. How it is different from common sense. To answer these questions, we need to understand a couple of things. The things that I have highlighted. First thing, you should understand what is interaction. You should understand what is common sense. Now, what is sociology? What kind of things are studied in sociology? You should have an idea about it. Now, what is interaction? See, many of the sociologists, many of these thinkers, they have focused on interaction. So interaction has been a focal point. There is an entire discipline, interactive approach discipline, which focuses on interaction. What is interaction? It is the action between individuals. How an individual acts, reacts in the society. That is, and again, this interaction is dependent on context. It is context specific, and again, you need to understand the meaning behind it. The interactions can be of different forms, 5 different forms: conflicts, exchange, competition, cooperation, quotient. Different types of interactions are there, but we need to understand the meaning behind these interactions. And many of the thinkers, to understand society, have tried to understand the interactions. Accordingly, they have come across multiple theories. So it is one of the focal points. Now, another dimension the question is talking about is common sense. Now, what is common sense? Common sense is the average knowledge. It is the minimum body of knowledge that one is expected to know, so that person can effectively participate in society. Again, this is shared by people. It is held commonly by people, and it also has its own limitations, restrictions. But one thing here, common sense is not universal. It can vary depending on the person, it can vary depending on the situation, and also it can vary from place to place. Okay. Social interactions are more of a group phenomenon. Also, social interaction is intuitive. It is more calculative. At that point of time, you are trying to find the way you are interacting depends on that context. But when it comes to common sense, it might be pre-calculated. So different factors, historical factors, moralistic factors could have had an impact on you, and that is what you are diverging at that point of time. Common sense varies from place to place, but at the same time, in a particular place, it might be same. It might be those commonly held notions. But social interactions can vary. So this is the difference. But also, there exists some sort of convergence between common sense and interaction. There is one branch in sociology, the ethnomethodologists. So they are studying social interactions by interpreting common sense meanings. So they do not just record the common sense. They try to understand how these common sense, these shared meanings, shared thoughts have come into being. So they will look at the historical factors and other factors, how this particular notion came into being. So this is the convergence. So they understand how the meanings were generated in the first place. So what you can do is, in the few words, okay, first few words, just mention what is social interaction and how sociologists have focused on social interaction. Then you discuss what is common sense, how common sense and social interaction differ. But at the same time, some branches of sociology, they're also trying to use common sense to understand social interaction. So this particular question is from the first chapter, Sociology and Discipline. It seems straightforward, but it is not straightforward. We have to understand. But if your thinking is clear, if your concepts are clear, you will be able to answer it. So this is the first question. Now, the next question, distinguish between facts and values in Weber's study of Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism. This is related to the second chapter, the second topic in our syllabus, and also it has some relationship with thinkers, Weber's Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism. Now, to answer this question, you need to understand, you should have a clarity. What do you mean by facts and what do you mean by values? Facts are those aspects of social reality which can be observed from outside. They are amenable to sensory observations. So you can measure facts, you can see facts. But what are values? Values are the socially accepted standards of desirability. Those things which you desire to have. Again, values can be different values. It can be means values, it can be ends values. Now, these two things should be in your answer. Now, the next part of the question asks you, how are these different? And you have to give examples from Weber's study of Protestant ethics and spirit of capitalism. Now, what was the study about? In this study, Weber is saying that because of certain values, Protestant ethics, it is leading to emergence of capitalism, or it is leading to prevalence of capitalism. There is some correlation between Protestant ethics and spirit of capitalism. So for his studies, he is using facts and he is also talking about values. Now, what are the facts that Weber talks about? Now, Weber, he finds out different facts here. He's studying different historical as well as material conditions. He's finding that there are certain areas in Europe where you have prevalence of Protestantism, more Protestant peoples in this region. Apart from that, there are these areas also converge with the areas where you find out emergence of capitalism. So these things are facts. You can easily observe from your different reports will be there, which can tell you that these many industries were there in Europe at this point of time. And again, you also have data which can point to the fact that these many people are practicing this particular faith. So these are facts you can easily find out. Now, what are the values that are mentioned in his discussion? So two kind of things here. two terms that we see here, Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Both the things are related to some sort of values. For example, the spirit of capitalism has within it certain values. What are the values? Punctuality can be a value, justice can be a value. What kind of life you should live, frugal life, whether you should be, what kind of work you should do, whether you should be hardworking, whether you should be industrious. So these are different values associated with capitalism, with the spirit of capitalism. Similarly, Protestant ethics. With Protestant ethics also comes certain values. Ethics are nothing but values. So again, what are the values associated with Protestant ethics? Austerity, abstinence, self-discipline, and again you should have a calling in life. So these are the Protestant values. This way you can differentiate between the facts and the values that are being discussed in this particular study. So this clearly brings out the difference between facts and values. This is more of a straightforward question, but the only thing here is you should be able to link the study of Weber with what you have learned in chapter 2. Once you have understood it, you can easily find out. Again, what you can also do further is find out which were the means values, which were the end values. So this is comparatively an easy question. Now, the next question here, straight from thinkers, straight from Mead. The question here is, do you think I and me are central terms in Mead's work? Now, in this particular question, you can just give a brief introduction. What was Mead's work? So he's focusing on symbolic interactionism. He's talking about 3-4 terms. For example, he talks about the dynamics between self, mind, and the society. Then he talks about I and me. I and me are the constituents of self. So now you need to mention what is me, what is I. Me is the conformist self. He's the internalized general order. It is the one which ensures harmony between the individual and the group functioning. It is the one which is responsible for social control. So me is an important part of self, and me constitutes of all these things. What is I then? I is that savage self. It is innovative, it is more creative. It is the one responsible for novelty, and it is the one which cannot be predictable, which is unique. But it also helps in contribution of realization of self. So I and me, what are the features? Why they belong to self, and the self is also undergoing changes. It is not something which is constant. It is also a process, and how there is a dynamic between self, mind, and the society. All these things needs to be covered in this particular answer. So understanding of I and me is very important to answer this. So this is directly from thinkers. This is a straightforward question, not very difficult to answer. Next question, what is the difference between natural and social inequality? Give examples from caste and class dimensions. So here, key terms are natural and social inequality, and then we have to give some examples from caste and class dimensions. Understand what is inequality. For that, you need to understand what are differences. Okay, understanding of differences, inequality, stratification is very important. They're not asking about stratification, so we need to understand what do we mean by differences, what do we mean by inequality. Now, what do we mean by natural inequality? See, certain inequalities are there because of biological attributes. Okay, so these inequalities are called the natural inequalities. For example, on the basis of race or on the basis of age. So these kind of inequalities are the natural inequalities. According to Rousseau, he says that these natural inequalities are very small, they're very minor, and they're not that much important. But important thing here is, these natural inequalities can be the base on which there can be social inequalities. Natural inequalities can lead to construction of social inequalities. We'll come to this. Now, what is social inequality? Within society, the distribution of privileges is not same. Some will have greater access to privileges, some will have less access to privileges. For example, some people might have more wealth, some people might have better status, some people might have more access to power. So on the basis of wealth, power, status, prestige, there can be different kind of inequality. And this social inequality is the main reason for stratification in the society. Hierarchy is on the basis of social inequality. But one thing I told you, how natural inequality can lead to social inequality. See, certain factors, for example, birth is a natural factor. You are born, it is a natural factor. But it can lead to social inequality in the longer run. Where you are born, if you are born in a Dalit family, or if you are born in a Brahmin family, in future, your attainment of different secular goals, secular interests will vary. So in future, your class positions can also vary. So birth, which is a natural process, can lead to differences along the caste hierarchy. So you are born in a Dalit family or you are born in a Brahmin family, there will be caste differences. Caste inequality is there. Apart from that, it can also lead to unequal position in the market, which is the class dimension. So this is the difference between natural inequality and social inequality. Natural inequality might be less significant, but it can lead to social inequality. And social inequality is very significant. It is the one which leads to social stratification. And again, what are some of the examples from caste as well as class dimensions? So again, it is not a very difficult question to answer. Next question, a very straightforward question. Most of the textbooks will have this thing. So the question is, what are the new forms of family in developed societies? So the focus here is developed societies, and you're focusing on family. So you can start with one line on family. What do you understand by family? And then in developed societies, just you can mention how the values are changing. Achievement orientation, individualism. So all these, what are the value systems in developed society? One line you can say. Then you can say how these modern values go hand in hand with the institution of family, which has led to creation of pluralization of families. So modern values leading to, or the value system that is there in developed societies, how it is leading to pluralization of families. So what are the different kind of families you observe? For example, in many societies, in developed countries, you'll find reconstituted families. That means the husband and the wife, they were previously married with someone else, they had children from someone else, but they got divorced, they got separated, and now these two people, they are living together, and they might also have children of their own. What is single parent family? Again, you might not have got married, you have some kids, you might have adopted someone. So single parent families. Cohabitation, live in relationships. Okay? You're not necessarily getting married, you can stay together. Homosexual or gay families, okay? Same gender families, communes. There are examples. For example, there is example from for example, there are instances from countries like US in which they are living in community. The children belong to the community. Another type of family, living apart together. So they're living apart, but they're also together. That means a couple. It can be a same gender couple, it can be a heterosexual couple. Now, socially, people know that they are together, but they're not staying together. They might have sexual intimate relationships. So again, this is another type of family in recent times. So easy to answer question from kinship systems. Okay, family and kinship. So this completes our compulsory questions from part A. So the next question is a question related to the chapter 2 of our syllabus. Is non-positivistic methodology scientific? Now here there are two dimensions. One is scientific, one term scientific. What do we mean by science? What do we mean by scientific methods? The other thing, what is this non-positivistic methodology? So first thing, we need to talk about science. Then we will talk about positivism and non-positivism, and then how there is some sort of convergence or there can be some sort of differences. All these things has to be there in your answer. So first thing, what is science? We know the definition of science. It is a systemized body of knowledge, and on what basis this body of knowledge forms? On the basis of empirical evidences. Now this body of knowledge has certain elements. For example, it has some worldview, it has some perspective, it has a well-defined subject matter, it has certain concepts. These concepts are used to understand science. Apart from that, it has some steps. These are the steps you need to follow. For example, observation, comparison, generalization. These are certain steps that need to be followed. So when I say something is scientific or not scientific, that means we need to come back to these definitions to understand that. Next thing here, what do we mean by non-positive methodology? So for understanding non-positive methodology, we need to understand what is positivism. Positivism, a very predominant approach that is given in sociology, started by Comte, and also Durkheim talks about it. Durkheim says that sociology is the study of social facts, and social facts are something which you can observe from outside. Non-positivists, the other strand of researchers, they opposite. They say that sociology, the subject is human beings, and human beings are characterized by volition, genes, other things. So you need to understand the meanings that human beings give to a particular situation, to a particular context, and these meanings cannot be understood from outside. That is the reason these non-positivist thinkers, those who are opposing positivism, they have come up with their own methods. For example, Weber has his own methods. Then you have symbolic interactionism, you have ethnomethodological approach. So their methodology is different from positive sciences, and they feel positive sciences are inappropriate for understanding society. So that is the reason what they're saying. They're saying you need to replace scientific methods or the positivistic methods. But there are some other non-positive thinkers. They are not so much extreme in their view. They feel that these non-positive methods should be supplemented by scientific methodology. So this is the place where there is a convergence between scientific methodology and non-positivism. A prominent example here is Weber's study of Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism. So here he is also referring to different facts. So when he's trying to say that this part of Europe, okay, there was these many Protestants, or this part of Europe there was prevalence of capitalism. These are the data that he's acquiring from outside. These are all facts, and he is observing them from outside. He's collecting data and he's studying that, and then he is using his own other methods to bring all these things together. So scientific methodology and non-positivist methods can go hand in hand. Okay, they can be used to supplement each other. Apart from that, another thing you can say is the scientific methods, okay, have all these things. They have these elements. If you see this, you'll also find that sociology itself falls under this category. It has certain perspective. It is a well-defined subject matter. It has a body of knowledge. It also has different steps. There are different methodologies. One of the methodologies is non-positivist methodology. Another kind of methodology is positive methodology. So sociology is itself a science. It might not be a pure science, but it is a social science. So sociology itself is a science. So, and non-positivist methodology is one of the ways to understand this particular branch, particular field of study. So there is also this convergence. So it should not blatantly reject that non-positivist methodology is not scientific. So this question, it is not a very direct question. It was a little difficult. Only if you understand all these dimensions, then only you should have attempted it. Next question, explain Durkheim's basic arguments on suicide. And then he's saying, can you analyze the high suicide rates of contemporary Indian society with Durkheim's theory? So two parts here. What does he say? What does Durkheim say about suicide? And then we have to compare it with Indian society, whether we can discuss or whether we can explain suicides in India with the theory proposed by Durkheim. So again, the first part, it is fairly simple. If you have covered Durkheim, you will be easily able to answer the first part. So what does Durkheim say about suicide? He says that suicide is a social fact. Different societies have different levels of suicide. Suicidogenetic current is prevalent among societies. Some societies, the level of suicides are more. For example, among Protestants, suicide rate is more. Among men, the suicide rates will be more. Among unmarried people, suicide rates are more. So he's finding out these kind of correlation, and then he's finding out the underlying factor. Okay? Integration, regulation, all these things are the ones which impact the suicide rates. But yeah, he's also not denying that certain people might be more predisposed to committing suicides. Currents exist within the society But again, within the society, some people are more likely to commit suicide, some people are less likely to commit suicide. So he's classifying these things, and then he's finding the underlying factor, and then he's classifying suicides. What can be the different kinds of suicides that exist? So this is what Durkheim talks about suicide. So it is a social fact. Now, next part here, do we have certain learnings, or can we apply Durkheim's classification or Durkheim's findings for contemporary Indian society? To some extent, we can use it. For example, farmer suicide in India. We can understand farmer suicide in India using Durkheim's approach. For example, some of the farmer suicide in India can fall under the criteria of anomic suicide. Now, what is an anomic suicide? Something unexpected happens. So there is weakening of some sort of regulations. So you might be in a situation of anomy. It can lead to prevalence of suicides. For example, many times farmers in India commit suicides because of unexpected events. Unexpected events like failure of crops. There's monsoon failure, there's failure of crops, and you are committing suicide. There is no support system from the side of the government, bureaucracy. So those kind of suicides can fall under anomic suicides. Again, we can also put farmer suicides under egoistic suicides. What is egoistic suicide? When your individual conscience, it varies with the conscience collective. When you feel that you are no more an asset to the society or the family. So sometimes these farmers, they're pushed to the brim. They feel that they are losers. They could not handle. They're no longer useful for the family. They're no longer an asset for the family, and they can commit suicide. So farmer suicides, to some extent, can be explained using this. Apart from that, there is high prevalence of suicides among children. These stress because of exams. It can also lead to suicides. In last few years, it was also observed that a place like Kota in Rajasthan, known for its known as a coaching hub, coaching for IIT, for medical institutions. There were a lot of suicides. And again, if you look at the suicide notes of the children, you will find that many children, they felt that they were not of any use for their family. The family has a lot of expectations from them, but they were not able to fulfill all these things. So again, it can also fall under that category, egoistic suicide. Children felt that they could not meet the goals that were set by their parents. And again, parents are parts of the society, larger member of society. They are also influenced by whatever is the preconceived notions in the society. So children indirectly feel that they cannot meet the goals of the society. The individual conscience does not sync with the collective conscience, leads to suicides. So these can be some basic examples which you can use for your answer. But again, you can also say that we cannot completely explain all the different kinds of suicides that we see in Indian society, the high prevalence of suicides, from Durkheim's perspective. Because you remember, Durkheim's suicide theory was also criticized on multiple grounds. So you can put all these perceptions here, all these point of view here. The suicides can be hereditary. It can be impacted by mass media. If there is suicide by one prominent personality, it also leads to increase in the number of suicides. Sometimes biological factors can be there, sometimes psychological factors can be there. So not necessarily the Durkheim's approach to suicide can be used to understand all suicides. There can be some other ways as well. Okay, so both the things you need to mention. How much we can explain using Durkheim's approach, and what can be some other approaches to understand suicides. So this is about suicide. The first part is quite easy. The second part needs a lot of correlation, needs you to think a lot, needs you to read a lot, because many of these things are related to current events. In fact, there were some articles related to farmer suicide and Durkheim newspaper. If you, by any chance, if you had gone through them, you could have answered this question. Next question, evaluate if social stratification is functional for the society. That means two things we need to focus on. Whether stratification that we see in the society is functional. Does it have any positive role to play for the society? Now again, this is a very straightforward question, not very difficult to answer. You have to talk about the theory that is given by David and Moore. Then you have to also talk about the criticism that has been given by Melvin. Now what does David and Moore say? They say that there are certain roles in the society which are functionally important. Now these roles, for performing these roles, you need to have a better talent. Not everyone can do it. And again, it is not necessarily not just a talent, you also need to have some skills. So talent and skills are required to perform these functionally important roles. But for that, again, you need to be provided some sort of training. Now when you are being provided that training, you are losing out some precious years in your life. So to compensate for that loss, again, you might be given higher packages, or you will be given some sort of benefits, some sort of rewards. Differential access to rewards is given because you are performing some functionally important roles, and for performing that roles, you have acquired skills, and for acquiring those skills, you have taken some amount of time. And during this period of time, you are not getting any rewards. So now, when you are starting the performance of the role, you will be getting higher rewards. And because of this, the society gets differentiated. There is inequality in the society, and consequently, there is stratification. It is a form of institutionalized inequality. So Davis and Moore, they feel that this form of inequality is inevitable and it is functional because some important roles are being performed in the society. Again, since these roles are important, rewards are higher. Since these rewards are higher, others also get motivated to perform these roles. Okay? So this kind of inequality is good for the society. But again, this has been opposed. On what grounds? For example, how do you measure whether a role is functionally important or not? Is there any benchmark? Is there any standard? How do you measure that? Then again, the role of power. Sometimes power plays a very important role in distribution of rewards. Those who have higher bargaining power, they will get more rewards. Not necessarily they're getting more rewards because they're performing a better, higher, more functionally important role, or they have sacrificed so many years of their life. Then, how do you measure talent? Is there any way to measure talent? Also, whether all these functionally important roles require exceptional talent, can it not be performed by regular people? Another thing, you are getting more rewards because you have sacrificed. You have sacrificed some precious man years. But now, why should you be rewarded throughout your life? Maybe in the initial phase, you might be rewarded more because you have sacrificed. But generally, what we observe, an individual gets rewarded throughout his life. So again, that is another question. Davis and Moore, they say that because of this stratification, people might get motivated to perform, motivated to take up higher skills to perform this functionally important role. But again, there is a criticism that not necessarily that people will get motivated. Sometimes they know that there is this inequality. They know that these roles are these particular positions are difficult to acquire. They might even get demotivated. Sometimes people who are in the hierarchy, higher up in the hierarchy, they might prevent people from reaching up those scales. They might themselves, those who are in the topmost sections, top higher classes, they might themselves create barriers. And because of these barriers, what can happen? It can lead to hostility among members. It can lead to suspicion. It can also lead to distrust. So in the long run, what can happen is the society can get divided. It will not remain integrated. So rather than being functional for the society, it can be divisive. So social stratification need not be functional as per the theory given by Melville. So both the aspects you have to bring out. Again, you can even if you miss out on some point, it's fine. But both the things, whether it is functional, how it is functional, how it is not functional. So this is pretty straightforward question. Social stratification chapter, all these textbooks will be talking about it. So not a very difficult question to answer. Next question here. Does collapse of functionalism, bankruptcy of Marxism coincide with rupture of modernity? This particular question is very loaded. It talks about three different things. And again, notice one more thing. It is saying coincide. This word is there. It is also very important. Now, this particular question can be approached from multiple angles. And again, your answers can be subjective. So we'll discuss how it can be subjective. But key point here you can think is, for answering these questions, you should be aware of all these things. Collapse of functionalism, bankruptcy of Marxism, rupture of modernity. All these three things you should be aware of. If you don't know all these things, then don't answer the question. First of all, you need to understand what is collapse of functionalism. So when we say collapse of functionalism, that means the functionalist approach that we use in sociology is no longer relevant. So this particular dimension, for this you have to talk about what were the inherent challenges in the functionalist approach. They were fixated with order, they could not explain conflict. So all these things you have to answer. And because they were not able to carry out these things, that is leading to collapse of functionalism. But here again, the counter to this is not necessarily functionalism has collapsed. Now also there will be sociologists who will be using the functionalist approach. So both the things you can talk about. If you are saying collapse of functionalism has happened, give your justification for that. If you are saying functionalist approach is now also relevant, give your point of view related to that. The next thing, they're saying bankruptcy of Marxism. What do you mean by bankruptcy of Marxism? That means, again, Marxist approach, it has become bankrupt. The ideas, they are no longer relevant. The world has moved. There has been a shift. Now it is primarily a capitalist world, and what Marx talked about, they are no longer relevant. So that is the meaning of bankruptcy of Marxism. So again, indirectly what we mean to say, what are the challenges in the Marxist approach you need to mention here. Also one thing, you might also differ here as well. One point of view is, fine, Marx's approach are no longer relevant. What he had said, that there has to be a classless society, there will always be this inherent tensions between classes, and again because of this inherent tension between the classes, something will happen and it will lead to a classless society. Maybe that has not happened. All this polarization, popularization, homogenization, those things might not have happened. But at the same time, the counter to this is, with time, especially after this 2008 financial crisis, some theorists, some thinkers, they have started giving importance to Marxism. The sale of these books, Das Kapital, the books, it increased after this 2008 financial crisis. Maybe Marxism will become significant in time. So both the sides are there, and you need to take sides here. Apart from that, whether there is a rupture of modernity, again, it is something which is questionable. You can say there is a rupture of modernity, but at the same time, we are talking about a postmodern world. So if you are talking about postmodern world, again, modernity becomes important. So all these three things are subjective. All these three things are subject to debate. So it all depends whether what is your point of view on these things. And it is not only your views on these three things, your view related to coinciding. That means all these three things are happening at the same time. Again, you might vary, you might differ on these grounds, whether the time frames are same or whether the time frames are different. So whatever you are saying, your answer you should be able to justify your answer. Whether there is collapse of functionalism, what are the challenges in functionalism, whether Marxist approach is no longer relevant, and whether modernity has rupture. If all these things have happened and also they're happening at the same time, then you can say yes, or else your answer should be no. I would have preferred to say no, they're not happening at the same time, and not all these things are have also happened. Marxist approach might become more significant. Functionalism, not everyone has said that not everyone has given up on functionalist approach. Apart from that, there is this rupture of modernity has not happened. There is still these postmodern approaches are still there. So depending on the way you view the question, you have to answer this question. Value loaded question. Now the next question. Define patriarchy. How does patriarchy manifest in interpersonal relations? This again is not a very difficult question to answer. Again, if you understand stratification, in that social stratification chapter, you also talk about the gender dimensions. So you can answer patriarchy from that point of view. So one dimension is understanding patriarchy. The second thing is it is asking about interpersonal relations. So how does patriarchy get manifested? What is patriarchy? Patriarchy here we are referring to authority structures. Who has authority? If male members dominate, they are the ones who exercise authority, then it is a patriarchal structure. It gets manifested in different ways. The family head is generally the father. Again, different social institutions, they will also be having male leaders. And again, the principles, philosophies, they are also on the basis of male power. So this is the meaning of patriarchy, and this is the significance of patriarchy. So that you have to mention. The next aspect is how patriarchy is manifested in interpersonal relations. Now to simplify this thing, what you can do is divide interpersonal relations. These interpersonal relations can happen within family. These interpersonal relations can happen outside the family. So understand both these things. Within family, how the different bonds get impacted, how the conjugal bonds are impacted. Generally, the conjugal bonds, the relationship between the husband and the wife is subordinated to the sibling bonds. The brothers, whatever relationship they have. They are the ones who are holding the authority together, they're holding the properties together of the household. So the relations between them should be stronger. So the conjugal bond, the wife-husband relationship is made subordinate to the sibling bond. And again, within the sibling bonds, there can be a hierarchy. The elder brother might have more authority as compared to the younger brothers. Apart from that, how authority is distributed within the families, that is also important. Women might not be given authority. How resources are divided within the family, that is also very important. That also keeps on varying. Females might not be given access to different kind of resources. It is not just monetary resources, access to health services, all these things, women might get impacted. Authority, patriarchy also decides the division of labor. Generally, patriarchal societies will have sexual division of labor. So women will be restricted to household work, rearing of children, kitchen activities. Also, patriarchy has an impact on violence. Men assume that women are their property. So indirectly, men assume that women, they have the control over women's body and it can lead to violence. Apart from these dimensions, you can also think of interpersonal relations in the professional sphere. Patriarchy impacts that as well. How the relationship between subordinates get impacted, how the relationship between peers are impacted. Also, at workplace, sexual harassment is also a manifestation of patriarchy. Gender pay gap, that is there, again, a manifestation of patriarchy. So, interpersonal relations can be divided along these lines and you need to analyze it. So, what are the patriarchal manifestations on interpersonal relations? Next question, what is the difference between anomy, that is given by Merton, and Durkheim? You need to explain that. So, again, this is related to thinkers. Both the thinkers, they have talked about anomy. Now, when it comes to Durkheim, for Durkheim, anomy is normlessness. He feels that in a society, there are different rules and regulations. These rules and regulations are very important for ensuring stability in a society. So, interaction becomes inefficient, ineffective if these norms are replaced. These rules enable smooth interaction between people. But if these rules, they become weaker, or if they are broken, if they are replaced, if they become non-existent, then there can be an anomic situation. So, for Durkheim, anomy means normlessness. And he also gives an example. If you are becoming richer, so you should move to a higher class position in the society, you should ideally be happy, you should be contented, more than contented, you should be happy. But he says that whenever a person becomes richer, it can lead to suicides. Why? When you're becoming richer, the norms are changing. You are now part of another society, another class. And in this class, again, the norms may be different. The rules, regulations might be different. And because of this, there can be confusions, there can be conflicts in the minds of the individual. It can lead to a type of suicide which is called as anomic suicide. So, someone becoming rich all of a sudden can also commit suicide. So, anomy, as per Durkheim, is normlessness. Now, what does Merton say about anomy? See, Merton says that in any society, there are some socially defined goals. And then there are some socially defined ways by which you can achieve these goals. So there are goals, these goals you need to achieve, these goals are aspirational, and then there are institutional means by which you can achieve these goals. Now, what can happen sometimes is, people subscribe to these goals, they want to achieve that, but they might not have the institutional means to achieve that goal. So the socially accepted means, they might reject. So they might reject these means to achieve this thing. And in such a scenario, what will happen? There will be anomy. So anomy, as per Merton, is a state in which people are not unsure about norms. They are aware of the norms, but they're consciously rejecting these norms. They're trying to ignore that because they have to achieve these goals. And generally, what will happen because of this? There can be some sort of strain in the social processes. One example I can give you is, in society, everyone wants to have a decent standard of living. They want to improve their class position. Now, for that, there are some means. For example, you might take up education. Because of education, your skills might improve. Because of your skills, you might get a better job. And because of better job, your purchasing power might increase, and you might move up the social hierarchy. But there can be some people in the society who cannot afford an education. But they subscribe to those norms, that societal goals, that they want to become rich. They want to have a better standard of living, but they do not have education. In that case, they might use some other goals, other means, which does not have the sanction of the society. They might resort to source stealing. So this kind of behavior is called anomic behavior as per Merton. So he has given examples. You can also give examples from American society. And then he basically classifies the behavior of individuals. And again, some behavior, they are conformist behavior. They conform, they accept the rules of the society. For example, those people who have the institutional means to achieve these goals and who also subscribe to these goals, they are the conformist. But again, there are some sections who cannot achieve these goals with the institutional means, but still they do not divert from their path. So that is ritualism. Apart from that, there are three other types of behavior which reject the institutional means, okay, or the societal norms. So this is innovation, retreatism, and rebellion. Just can give a brief, rough overview of things. You don't need to explain all these things in detail because it is again a 10-mark question. Only you should mention what does Durkheim feel about anomy, what does Merton feel about anomy. So that is going to sum up your answer.